Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're going to be talking about the newly released AT3 Redtail LPVO. But before we get into that, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe, as all that sort of stuff is free and it does help me out quite a bit. On top of that, go ahead and comment literally anything down below. On top of that, I do have a subscribe star, which is basically just a pro to a Patreon. We will actually be giving away this scope and a couple others this month, so go ahead and check that out if you're interested. On top of that, there's also my website, which has a couple Mark II upper receivers left, and that's about it. Now, full disclosure, on the AT3 Redtail, this is the 124 version, is that they did send this out to me pre-release, so I've actually had it for several months at this point, and I've just been waiting for them to release it to actually put out the video and talk about it. Now, on top of that, I'm also an affiliate member for them, so if you purchase something using my link, I'll make like 7% or something like that. I'm not going to include any links in the description of this video because I don't need their money, and vice versa, I don't need your money either. But if you are interested in how much I make off of this or any company that I work with, all of my affiliates and exactly what I make from each one are listed on my website in the affiliate section. So with that out of the way, there was no money changing hands. They sent me this scope. I put about 1,200 rounds through it while it was attached to 3 or 4 different guns, and here is the review and how that all went. So getting some of the boring specifics out of the way, this is of course the 1 to 4X model. It is about 9.5 inches long, which is pretty short for an LPVO. It has a very light weight of 16 ounces, which is very, very good, not including the mount. Speaking of the mount though, it is a 30mm one-piece mount that is included with the price tag. I believe these start out at $230 for the 1 to 4 and then $300 for the 1 to 6. Now, the included mount is possibly the weakest design I have ever seen. However, as you'll see in the drop test later on, it did hold up just fine. Now, pretty obviously, the Redtail moniker comes from the included red extended throw lever, which is quite nice. It is included and it is removable as well. It only has about 3 or 4 threads that actually engages on the magnification ring. Speaking of the magnification ring, it does of course go from 1 to 4. It is a 180-degree throw, which is just fine. It's not super fast, not super slow. But one thing I will say about, because there's only a couple threads that actually engage in the magnification ring itself, it did loosen up on me a tiny bit a couple times over about the 1,200 rounds that I used it. However, most of that was on 7.62x39, which is a little harsher recoil than 5.56. Though if you were to apply some Loctite, I believe that would completely remedy the solution. Just go ahead and use blue or red Loctite depending on if you want to take it off at all. And if I didn't mention, the magnification throw itself has a decent amount of resistance, but it is very, very smooth, no grinding, no binding, nothing like that. So overall feels very high quality. Moving back, we do of course have our rear diopter to adjust the reticle to your eyes. Everybody is going to be a little bit different. The main tube itself, it is a 30mm main tube and it is 6063 T6 aluminum. Not sure if that makes much of a difference between that and 6061. But it is a slight difference. It is of course hard coat anodized in this very nice black anodization, and as you can tell, we have exposed turrets. Now, these are not lockable turrets. They are resettable if you need to do that. They are 1/2 MOA increments, which is just fine. The only problem that I really have with them in general is that I don't really like exposed turrets to begin with on an LPVO, especially a 1 to 4. I really don't think that's necessary, especially when it does include a very good reticle, which we will get to later on. So I don't really like the exposed turrets. I think it makes it a little more bulky than it needs to be. On top of that, the clicks are very mushy, not very audible. You can feel them all right, but again, they are very, very mushy. So overall, I think a capped design is much better, a little bit stronger, more secure, that sort of thing, because these do not have a locking mechanism. So if these get bumped, they will just shift because it's not all that much effort to actually adjust them as you need. Now, this does also have an illuminated reticle. It has 11 different settings, no night vision settings, which is perfectly fine. I don't think most people are using night vision with their LPVOs. However, again, like most budget LPVOs other than the Viper PST Gen 2, this is going to be not quite daylight bright. It's going to be fairly bright. It's going to tint the reticle red outside in full daylight. However, it's not going to be exceptionally bright, and it is in fact a little bit dimmer than some of the other budget LPVOs on the market.
Same spot. Okay. Gonna try and go for 400 now.
So with all the external stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the eye relief, the eye box, the glass itself, and of course the reticle. So starting off with eye relief on the Redtail 1 to 4, you have a very very generous eye relief on 1X, more than you will really ever need, though of course there is going to be a perceived shift in magnification where your eye is forward or backward, so closer it's a little bit zoomed out, farther it's a little bit more zoomed in, that sort of thing. So keeping your head in the optimum position gets you the best 1X, though we will talk about the 1X in just a minute. On 4X it is of course going to tighten up a little bit, however it is still quite good. The eye box on 1X is pretty decent overall. You get about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch in either direction in the optimum point. So the eye box and eye relief is actually quite good, but none of that really matters if you can't see anything through the glass. And I am happy to say that the glass is fairly decent. It's going to be basically on par with any of your budget LPVO. So that is the Strike Eagle Gen 2s. That's going to be your Burst RT6. That's going to be Swamp Fox Arrowhead, Tomahawk, your Bushnell ARs, that sort of thing. It's going to be very, very similar to all of the other budget LPVOs in this price category. I might give this one a slight edge in terms of brightness, and that could be just to a more efficient architecture that they're using with cheaper glass, because of course if you have more cheap glass stacked in front of each other, you're going to get a worse looking image. And this is a very lightweight scope, so I imagine they're not using a ton of glass for this 1:4 architecture that they have in here. It is going to be fully multi-coated with green emerald coating, I believe. Now the glass is definitely not perfect whatsoever. There's very little optical degradation between 1 and 4X. However, 4X is going to be a little bit dimmer than 1X. You are going to lose some of that brightness. On top of that, your edge-to-edge clarity is not very good. You're going to get a little more warping, so a little more fisheye effect on the outer, say 10% of the glass. Not a huge deal, but it is definitely noticeable. On top of that, with bright things inside of the image, you're going to get a lot of color shift or chromatic aberration. Basically, things will start to shift from silver to blue to pink to purple, and that's only going to be for the brightest parts of the image, which is a problem on most Chinese glass until you start to get into more higher end optics. However, nothing really specific to this optic. It's more indicative of the sector in general of the optics market. Now, on top of that, so the glass is decent, or at least on par with other budget LPVOs. Now, how much can you actually see through it when you're looking through it? So at 1X, you have an FOV, or field of view, of 94 feet at 100 yards. And that is very small. Generally, I believe that anything over 100 feet is good, anything over 110 is excellent, and the 1:4 model has a very diminutive 94 feet at 100 yards, which means that you get hammered with a very harsh tube effect. Makes it look like you're looking through a toilet paper roll or a paper towel roll or something like that, where you get a lot of scope shadow in your image just because of that very diminutive field of view. So when you're looking through it, it kind of looks like you're looking through a, very large tube. Now, of course, that's really not an issue at 1X, because of course at 1X you should be using both eyes open anyway, so you should have pretty close to 180 degrees field of view. Where that is, however, starting to become an issue is going to be at higher magnifications, which for this optic is 2, 3, or 4. And in fact, I believe at 4X on this optic, you actually see less than what you see at 6X on the Vortex Strike Eagle 1:6 Gen 2, which has 117 feet field of view at 1X. So it really does start to make it a little bit harder to use. Not terribly harder to use, but a little bit harder to use at higher magnifications, because you're just going to be seeing less of that magnified image when you probably want to maintain some of that field of view. And when you're already working with a low magnification power, you would hope to still have a very decent field of view. However, with this optic, you do not. Now, I do want to caveat this a little bit, and we will talk about the 1:6 a little bit later on, but the 1:4 is the model that I have. The 1:6 actually has 111 feet of field of view at 1X, which is very good in my opinion. That's a very decent field of view, especially for a budget optic that comes in around $300 with a mount. That is a very decent field of view. However, that is not the optic we're talking about today, because again, they sent me out the 1:4 model. So that is a problem with the 1:4 and one of the major downsides. But now let's go ahead and get into the second major downside of the optic, and that is going to be its actual 1X performance. So basically, it has a true magnification level at 1X of something like 1.1 to 1.3 with a pretty egregious fisheye effect. Now that is going to depend on your eyes, how you have the diopter set, how far forward you have the optic set on your rail. But it does have a pretty egregious 1X. It has one of the worst 1X performances out of any budget LPVO that I've used. Basically, it has a pretty egregious fisheye around the outer, say 10 to 20% of the optic or of the field of view inside of the optic. So as you're transitioning and dragging through, the whole image kind of shifts and warps, especially if you have stuff at different distances. It becomes even more noticeable. Basically, what that does, at least for me in my shooting, and again, I've used this quite a bit for a couple months now, what that has done for me is slowed me down tremendously. So basically, when you pull up to the optic for the first time, you see the image and then you put the glass in front of your eye, and then your brain has to process the image a second time because it's not the same image that you were looking at. It's kind of a similar image that's a little bit warped and that sort of thing. So it, for me anyways, it creates the slightest of delays that I don't necessarily find myself experiencing with other budget LPVOs, and especially like the Vortex Viper PST Gen 2, which is of course a $600 optic, so I don't really want to compare to it in terms of price to performance. Just to say that the 1X on the Redtail 1-4 is very, very poor. So if you want some sort of budget high-speed LPVO that can also stretch out to 400 or 500 yards, this is going to be, unless you train a ton with it and just get absolutely perfectly used to it, it's going to be really hard to overcome for most people. And again, I shoot a lot more LPVOs than most people, and this one here is noticeably worse on 1X than those other LPVOs that I mentioned and tested before. So the poor 1X performance combined with the very shallow field of view kind of kills the optic for me overall, and especially since there's a lot of other budget LPVOs that do a better job that are in a very similar price category, maybe not quite as cheap as the 1-4 model, but still in a very similar price category. And on top of that, this is only a 1-4X, so because the 1X is not very good and you only have 4X on the top end, it's not like it excels at long range and then is hampered in the short range aspect of it. It's kind of hampered all over, so it's not really good at any one thing. Now, that being said, I did take this optic out to 400 yards with a 11.5 5.56. It was actually my Mark 1 upper receiver, and it does just fine. And speaking of that, it does have a very good, very easy to use reticle. So I'll go ahead and show a picture of that on screen and some in-optic footage as well. It basically has a mostly complete outer ring with a chevron in the center. Now, I am a very big fan of chevron aiming points because, of course, that tip is a point of infinite precision. So you can still, even with a 1-4X, you can still hold very, very tight groupings using that very, very fine aiming point. So that is a big plus to me. And on top of that, it's not slow either. I like the combination of a circle with a chevron in the center, and on top of that, it also has a ballistic ladder for 5.56, and I believe it goes out to 600 yards. Now, I was testing it with an 11.5 with a suppressor on it, not exactly peak performance in terms of 5.56 ballistic, so it was a little bit off for me, but you're always going to have to tune that to your gun, your ammunition, in your environmentals, all that sort of fun stuff. But in general, the BDC does a really good job. It's very, very simple. It doesn't do anything like wind holds or anything else like that, but for a 1-4X optic, in terms of reticles, I would say the reticle is actually, if not the best for this style of optic, it's very, very close to it. So I think that they did do a very, very good job with the reticle. Now, as I mentioned before, the reticle brightness on max illumination is not all that great, but that's kind of a downside of most budget LPVOs, so I'm not really going to hold it against this guy. Now, I know that I've been very harsh on this optic up to this point, but hopefully, as you can tell through the footage that I've been putting in here, that it is still quite usable, and you can still transition, and you can still shoot quickly, you can still acquire targets, you can still shoot at longer distances. However, with this optic, it's just going to be a little bit more difficult than it is going to be on other similarly priced optics, which kind of knocks this out of the running for me. Now, I do want to say one last thing. A note of praise on the optic is that I do a double drop test on every optic, or basically every optic that I get, and this optic was no different. So I performed a 6-round group with this 10.5 7.62 by 39 from Bear Creek Arsenal that has been running extremely well, and I have not had to replace or clean anything on it in a very long time, and it is very, very disgusting. But other than that, so I did a 6-round control group at 50 yards. I did a double drop test on the top and the side of the optic, did another 6-round group, and experienced exactly no shift in zero, and that is quite good. I do think that it is a durable enough optic. I think the reticle is quite good, so there are some nice things about the optic, but what really holds it back for me is its 1x performance and its poor field of view. Now on paper, the 1:6 model theoretically fixes all of my issues that I have with this optic. It has a much wider field of view at 111 feet at 1x, which is very good in my opinion, almost top tier, not quite there, but very good, especially for the money. It does include a mount for $300, but even then, even if it has a much better 1x and of course that very good field of view, it still lags slightly behind the Strike Eagle Gen 2 1:6, at least on paper, just slightly, and the Strike Eagle Gen 2 has the best reticle other than like some of the ACSS reticles, although it kind of copies the ACSS reticle. Either way, I really like the Strike Eagle 1:6 and the 1:8, both of the Gen 2 models, and it's very stiff competition for the AT3, which is going to be of course a newcomer in the market. And for a first attempt, I really like what they've done. The one external change that I would make to it, or two external changes I would say, is make it a capped turret design. You really don't need exposed turrets, especially for a 1:4, since it's not like a precision long range where you need to be making big adjustments on the fly. On top of that, I would make the throw lever just have a few more threads of engagement so that it is less likely to back out, and to have a more strong lockup so that if you drop it, it's not going to snap off, because again, there's only a couple threads that actually engage on here, even though it feels high quality, it's machined aluminum, it's quite nice, that sort of thing. Other than that, if they could fix the 1x performance, it would be a very good deal. And again, the 1:6 model might be the ticket. It might be the top 2 or 3 in terms of price to performance. However, I don't have that one here, so I'm only theorizing at this point. Now I might get the 1:6 model in and do some additional testing on that one there and bring you guys a video on that, but for right now I would probably say stick away from the 1:4, because even though it is a little bit cheaper than some other LPVOs on the market, coming in with a mount for $230, it also performs proportionally worse, so I wouldn't really recommend it. It would be a pass for me. I would not spend my own money on it, so I would not advise you guys spend your money on the 1:4 model. The 1:6 is a bit of a question mark, and again, on paper does seem better. However, I don't have it on hand, so I can't really comment anything too concrete about it. So that's about it for the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. If any of you have experience with the 1:6 model, go ahead and hit me up and tell me how it goes, if it's better or worse than the 1:4 model. And again, comment down below if I should go ahead and pick up the 1:6 model to see if it fixes all of the issues that I have with the 1:4. But that is about it for me, guys. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace off.